a spectacular array of speakers who range from scientific researchers, experts, psychologists, and Buddhist practitioners. The Mental Flourishing series has hosted distinguished experts and world thinkers who ponder and gauge the effectiveness of mindfulness apps, meditation, emotions, mind training, and more. And today we are very thrilled to have Director General of the Royal Civil Service Commission of Bhutan, Tashi. Ms. Deshpem is an experienced public administrator with areas of interest in coaching and leadership. She initiated her career as a civil servant in 1996 within the administrative services after completing an honors bachelor's degree in commerce from Sharupsi College, Kangwon. She completed her Master's of Science in Economics from Kagawa University in Japan, where her dissertation studied the structure and performance of industries towards the economic development of Bhutan. She's recognized for her civil service career in the Ministry of Finance, where her notable contributions were the introduction of the green tax and other fiscal policies from 1999 to 2014. So the CBS team is honored to welcome such a remarkable civil servant and greatly anticipate this exchange. Madam Director Tashi, the floor is yours, La.
Thank you, Yedzin, for that beautiful introduction. Good evening, Dr. Otto. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have the pleasure to welcome our audience to this very exciting and insightful 5th Shincheika virtual seminar series on mental flourishing, views from science and practical views on emotions and mind training. This is presented to you by Center for Bhutan Studies and GNH with the International Society for Bhutan Studies. For the information of our audience, under this series earlier, we had the privilege of hosting various renowned eminent thought leaders and practitioners in the field of mind. The earlier conversation was on unwinding anxiety with Judd Brewer, on brain and emotions with Dr. Richard Davidson. Kim Samuel gave a talk on social connectedness. And last week, we hosted Barbara Fredrickson on positive emotions. Before we proceed with today's session, may I take the opportunity to thank Professor Sabina of Oxford University, Tashi Karmawura, President of CBS and GNS Studies, and team at CBS for creating this wonderful virtual space for learning. And today, we have the pleasure of listening and interacting with Dr. Otto Scharmer. Dr. Otto would share with us his work on leading from emerging future from ecosystem to ecosystem economics. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm all in joy to be moderating today's session. Like me, the audience here must be most excited to hear Dr. Otto. Dr. Otto, your LinkedIn profile picture with Tashi Shedzong in the background was indeed a very pleasant surprise. It actually gave me a feeling of connectedness and a sort of a comfort to actually host today's session. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Dr. Otto, today's eminent speaker. Before I give the floor to Dr. Otto, let me introduce Dr. Otto. Dr. Otto Scharmer is a senior lecturer in MIT Management's Law School and co-founder of Presencing Institute. He chairs the MIT Ideas Program for Cross-Sector Innovation, introduced the concept of presencing, learning from the emerging future in his best-selling books, Theory U and Presence, The Presence, which is co-authored with Peter Singh, who probably all of us know is also the author of Fifth Discipline. His book, Dr. Otto's book, Leading from the Emerging Future, outlines 8 acupuncture points for transforming capitalism. His most recent book, The Essentials of Theory U, outlines the core principles and applications of awareness-based systems change. In 2015, Dr. Otto co-founded the MIT U Lab, which is a massive online course MOOC for leading profound change, which has since activated a global ecosystem of transformational change involving more than 160,000 users from 185 countries. So in March 2020, his Presencing Institute launched Gaia Global Activation and Intention and Action Learning Platform, which is a free online learning platform shared for deepening learning, geared towards profound personal, societal, and planetary renewal. I request the audience here to tap on to this valuable free resources. Dr. Otto earned his PhD in economics from Witten-Herdrich University in Germany. He received the Jameson Prize for Teaching Excellence at MIT, the European Leonardo Corporate Learning Award, and is a member of World Future Council. The United Nations Deputy Secretary General appointed Dr. Otto to the UN Learning Advisory Council for the 2030 SDG agenda. By now, audience here must be all ears to hear you, Dr. Otto. Please, Dr. Otto, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tashi, friends and colleagues. It is a great honor for me to be a part of this lineup with Richie Davidson and all the other ones that you named. And it's also an honor for me because ever since I had my 2 short visits to Bhutan a few years back, it has been, in fact, Bhutan has been an inspiration for me before I visited already, right? But especially after these visits. And so back then, when these visits happen in the context of a project that we call the Global Wellbeing Lab, one of the reasons to take international decision makers to study journey really to Bhutan is to really learn more about the GNH concept, since obviously there is kind of this big crisis about using GDP as a measure for economic progress. And Bhutan was one of the first examples to really show that it can, so the measures for economic progress can be structured in a very, very different way. And earlier today, I actually did the closing session of a series with the UNDP, which is, as some of you may know, it's kind of the organization that developed the Human Development Index, the HDI, which was a first step into beyond GDP, right, into a direction of measuring human well-being. But GNH is a whole step further because it's not only human, but also planetary well-being. And in the 2020 Human Development Report, as some of you will know, which is titled kind of the Human Development and the Anthropocene, the HDI measure has been complemented with another measure that measures the planetary pressure points. So what Bhutan first pioneered is now slowly also emulated and by the international community. And you can see it how kind of the HDI, the Human Development Index, is now moving towards measuring both human well-being and also planetary well-being. So Bhutan has played in the whole conversation we have now, development for what, right? So that the whole concept of development is a question that is beginning to be explored in many countries around the world, is also a result of the pioneering work that you all have been doing, that Bhutan has been creating in the world. So I'm indebted and in many ways, and I am touched by what you have been creating. And it's a great honor for me to share a little bit of my own experience and hopefully then move into a conversation with you. So if you allow me to just share my screen real quick, so then we can go just over a few core distinctions and concepts and also application examples. So what you see here, and I'm sure that is, you're very familiar with that, is really what all learning and development is revolving around today, which is that we are dealing with disruption, right? We deal with disruption as a global community, as countries, as governments, as companies, or like as industries. And disruption basically means that the future is going to be different from the past or the present. And while we know a lot about what's going on here, let's say current reality, we know less about what the future will be looking like, right? The emerging future. But what we know least about is the journey that takes us from here to there. And that has been always my core question. So my core question is, what does it take to lead in a moment of disruption? What does it take to, when you face a situation like that, where you can't just do more of the same? So what is the methodology that allows you to deal with such a situation? And the core proposition is something very simple, which is that it takes a journey that in part is an outer journey and in part is an inner journey. And the outer journey takes us to the edges of the system, where you begin to see new things, where you begin to move out of your own bubble. And the inner journey is a journey of opening the mind, opening the heart, and opening the will. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. The methodological background. So I'm here at MIT in Boston, and the reason I came here is systems thinking, right? And if you apply systems thinking, you mentioned Peter Senge, Tashi. It was actually his work and his center that drew me here. And so that was already 25 years ago. So I'm aging myself here, and I never managed to move on. So I got stuck here basically, right? So, and what you see here is probably something you have seen many times, right? So which is the essence of systems thinking depicted with an iceberg model, right? Which means systems thinking really starts with a very simple distinction, which is symptoms at the top, right? And root issues below the waterline, okay? And leadership from a systems view means it's not enough just to react against the symptoms, the problems that we face. But from a systems view, as a leader, what you're supposed to do is to understand and then address the deeper root issues at play. And when you look at these three words here, they capture, in a nutshell, the evolution of systems thinking over the past 50 years, right? And structures, of course, we deal below the waterline with broken structures, and then paradigms of thought, right? Beneath, right? Systemic structures and processes that are broken, we have mental models, right? We have paradigms of thought that are rooted in maybe old paradigms. And below that, right? So that's all well known. And the only new thing here is this, what I call source. And instead of source, you could also say awareness or attention or consciousness. So it's the deeper sources that we are operating from. And what I'm going to share with you is something that I call, and also Peter Senge calls, awareness-based systems change. So awareness-based systems change can be really summarized with the following four principles. Number one, you cannot understand a system unless you change it. That's the foundation of action research. And that's really why I came here to the US, to Boston from Germany, because I wanted to learn how to do that, how to develop a knowledge that is not only an abstract knowledge, but a knowledge that is helpful for the practitioners in the field, that is helpful for the change makers in society today. So you cannot understand a system unless you change it. It means if you want to understand what's going on, if you want to unlock and unearth the real knowledge, you need to participate. You need to move into these change processes yourself. Number two, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So that's the one sentence summary of my past 25 years of experience of running many initiatives of change and helping change makers to succeed. So what I'm basically saying is you cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are shaping and enacting that system, okay? Because if you don't, then the same people, if you only say change the structure here, then the same people will create the same problems just in a new structure, right? What you really need to do is to change the mindsets. And that's kind of the second principle of consciousness. And what it really means is if you want to succeed with leading change today, you need to address all four of these levels, okay? So let's just assume for a moment as a hypothesis that this is true, right? Then the real question is number 3, how? How do you do it? And that's what this one is referring to. So you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. So I would say traditional systems thinking would have said you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see itself. But what we learned is that's not good enough. Because if you just see what is broken with the system, it's stuck here, it's stuck in your head. And if you want to bridge the knowing-doing gap, the only way of doing is, the only way of succeeding is activating the knowing of the heart. And the way to activate the knowing of the heart is to access the knowing of our senses, right? If I don't feel the pain, that is the pain of the other, I'm still stuck in my head. I'm not kind of unlocking the sources of collective creativity in a system. So that's really the core principle here. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. And I will show you. I will show you tools how to do that later in this in my story. But that's kind of the core principle here. And the last one is this: you can't lead systems change unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. So that really gets to what I believe happens to be the essence of leadership. Leadership, in my view, is the capacity of a system to sense and shape the future. Leadership is the capacity of a system to sense and shape the future. If you double click on the word leadership, the English word leadership, it goes back to the Indo-European word life, and it literally means this: to step forth, to step from one world to the next one, okay? Interestingly, by the way, it also has a secondary meaning, which is to die. Think about that. The word root, the Indo-European word root of the English word leadership means stepping forth or to die. To die essentially is letting go, right? Letting go of one world and moving into another world that is only beginning to manifest if we have the courage to let go. If we have the courage to let go of what we know. And that is, I believe, really the essence of leadership, right? Obviously, it's kind of very much connected to the essence of Buddhism as well, right? Everything I'm sharing here. But it is, I think, the heart of leadership today. So leadership, in my view, is the capacity of a system to sense and shape, which means to sense and step into the future. And the more disruption, I believe we live in an age of disruption, right? COVID is just the beginning. There will be lots of more, it's not only digital disruption, it's not only environmental disruption, it's not only disruption through inequality and through mass migration in this century. There are many disruptions already coming our way. That is already out of our control. What is it that we are controlling? We are controlling how we respond to such a situation. And that has to do with this fourth principle, right? You can't lead systems change unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about. So I learned many things really through two things. One is to participate in practical initiatives myself, right? As a, which is, as I mentioned, the foundation of action research. You can't understand a system unless you change it. But the other one is to following experienced change makers and innovators in society, in science, in business, in society. And one of them, the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, he summarized his own experience of leading transformational change with the following line. He said, "The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener." So he basically says, the success of what I do as a leader, as a change maker, depends on the inner place from that I operate. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, we know everything in leadership research about what successful leaders do. We know everything about how the processes they use, but what do we know about the source, the inner place from that they operate? Very little, right? Because the source, the inner place from that we operate is almost something like a blind spot. And today, I would describe the source with these three capacities, right? The capacity to access your open mind, your open heart, and your open will, aka curiosity, compassion, and courage. And what do I mean by that? I mean by open mind, really the capacity to suspend our habits of judgment, which means really to look at reality with fresh eyes, unbiased, right? What I mean with open heart, right, in a leadership sense, is something very simple, which is when you deal with your stakeholders as a leader, right? Learning to look at a situation not through your own eyes, but through the eyes of your partners, through the eyes of your stakeholders. And that's the empathizing with the perspectives of other stakeholders, which is a foundation of being effective with network leadership challenges, as you all know. And what I mean with open will is really the capacity to let go and to let come, to let go of the past and of what isn't essential, and to let come of what is wanting to emerge. So that's a little bit the underlying concept. And you can, when you talk to innovators, when you talk to leaders, you see really journeys that activate these deeper spaces of operating. So that's, you could say, one part of the story. But then there is another part of the story, which is, if I don't know about Bhutan. I haven't been there the last few years, but I can talk about the American situation, right? I can talk about the situation in Europe. I can talk about the situation in South America and in other places. And what have we seen there over the past few years? I will tell you the exact opposite of everything I just told to you. So it's not a story of opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, but it's a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka ignorance, hate, and fear. And I could go at length into examples, right? In the COVID response and climate denial and a number of things, but you probably know these examples yourself. But what it boils down to is, instead of seeing and sensing reality and letting go of the old structures and connecting with the deeper sources of knowing, we see the opposite, right? Denial, which is not seeing. Desensing, which is getting stuck in our filter bubbles, right? Getting stuck in our own bubbles and holding on instead of letting go, right? And instead of presencing the future that's wanting to emerge, we are absencing. we are disconnecting from our highest future possibility. And, you know, if a system is going through these stages, what is the logical result? It results in this: blaming others, abuse, destruction, and eventually self-destruction. So instead of really bringing the new into reality as it desires. So that's, I would say, the real issue today, right? Ignorance, hate, and fear. And leadership today needs to develop the capacity to address these issues that are hugely amplified in society, in many societies right now, in a way that is transformative, right? It's not war on these things, as you know, but it's kind of addressing these energies in society in a way that is transformative. So what are these, you know, what are the how can you call these conditions? It's a condition of post-truth, post-democracy, and post-humanity. And by that, I mean disinformation and doubt. I mean architectures of separation, and I mean the amplification of fear and fanaticism. So that's kind of the background noise that we have. That's kind of a part of the leadership challenge. And the question is, you know, for leadership learning, what are the deeper capacities that we need to develop that would be transformative to these three conditions? And I would say the first one has to do with deepening our capacity of letting the data talk to us, right? So what is the essence of science? The essence of science is let the data talk to you, right? You're not imposing your opinions. Reality is speaking to you. And so I think moving beyond the post-truth conditions is to really kind of deepen this capacity. And from a leadership point of view, it is a lot related to this question: can you listen with humility? Can you listen with humility to information that you don't want to hear? How good are you in listening to things you don't want to hear? So are you avoiding that, or are you leaning into that, inquiring into that? Secondly, deepen democracy, right? Building architectures of connection, building architectures of deep dialogue. And so the leadership question here is, can you sense the system, so the system you are operating in, from the edges, by which I mean through the eyes of those stakeholders that are the most marginalized in the current system? How good are you in doing that? How good are you in noticing and addressing the blind spots that are habitualized in your own system you're operating in? And the last one is deepening our access to co-creativity and developing our capacity to activating action confidence. And the leadership question here is, can you sense and actualize the future as it emerges? It's really, how good are you in sensing future potential and stepping into the unknown? How good are you in doing it yourself? And how good are you in supporting others in your team, in your area of responsibility, operating this way? Because if you lead in a moment of disruption, that's one of the core currencies that you want to develop kind of in your own team. So let me, I will share a little bit more, but let me just pause here for a little moment. So in a way, I could almost kind of stop here already, because these three questions, right, are questions every leader has to ask herself or himself. Can you listen with humility? Can you sense the system from the edges, right? The system you're operating in from the edges. And can you sense and actualize the future? Can you feel the future? And you have the capacity to step into that territory, right? To make the first step and then to learn from the feedback. So that's kind of the first message and the first set of questions I want to leave you with. And the other piece I want to just briefly go over, and that will go a little quicker, is to just give you a very simple, to use the application example of systems thinking by using this as a metaphor, our smartphones, okay? So we all have them, or most of us, let's say, and there's two things we can do with our smartphones. We can load a new app, right? That gives us new skills, so that's we can do new things. But the other thing we do with these things is upgrade the operating system. And systems change deals with that, right? Upgrading the operating system. And what I find interesting is when I look at sector evolution, I see the same kind of operating system across all major branches of society. And I'm sure you will recognize that one way or another. And I would be really interested in how you would see that in your own context, in a Bhutanese context. Traditionally, let's say health and learning, right? 1.0 is input and authority-centric. That's the old tradition. It's traditional doctor-centric medicine. It's traditional teacher-centric ways of running a school. That has been replaced in many countries by the dominant mainstream model today, which is 2.0, output and efficiency-centric. Evidence-based medicine, right? So everything is based on research and evidence in terms of impact, and teaching for testing, right? So everything driven by numbers and test scores and so on and so forth, which of course is not real learning, as we all know, which leads us to a 3.0, which is outcome and user-centric. So this is the patient-centric medicine, right? So now we reorganize the healthcare delivery system around the patient journey so that we optimize the patient experience. And in the school, now we organize the learning process around the questions of the learner, right? So it's kind of now as a teacher, I'm a coach, right? I'm no longer just lecturing and telling, I'm coaching my students. So it's a whole different way of organizing the learning process, as you all know. That's the good school, the good health system today. Is that the future? I don't think so. I think the future is something that I call 4.0, co-creative and ecosystem-centric. In health, it is moving from fighting against the symptoms of pathologies, right, of sickness, to strengthening the sources of well-being and health. And in learning, it is no longer just having an innovative concept on the old curriculum, which is very much head-centric, but really whole person, whole systems learning, right? Whole person means head, heart, and hand, and whole system means both individual, but also a collective agency, right? Kind of all the social skills that are so critical today. In farm, right, traditional farmer-centric, industrial agriculture, monoculture, the mother of half of all our environmental problems, as you know. Organic agriculture is 3.0, right? Reduce negative footprint, that's good. That's a step in the right direction. Is that the future? I don't think so. Regenerative agriculture with food as medium for healing planet and people, really bringing the more a dimension, right? A more also spiritual dimension into agriculture, which really connects it also to health, right? Strengthening the sources of well-being. And I think, one of the things that has inspired me about Bhutan is really the commitment to really do this kind of agriculture here, to make that really mainstream and not only marginal as we have it in other countries. Finance, extractive capital, Wall Street, externality blind, right? Then impact investing, selective externality aware, like ESG, kind of. So many of the ESG investment funds right now, as you know, that's a step in the right direction, but it's still often addressing the symptoms, not the systemic root issues. And I think the 4.0 would regenerative finance, that is moving money from where we have too much, which is extractive capital, to where we have too little, which is regenerating our commons, right? Our ecological, cultural, and social commons. Governance, visible hand, hierarchy, right? Invisible hand, the market and competition. Organized interest groups, coalitions, and lobbying, and so forth. Those are the three we have in all countries today. But in the future, I think we'll need a fourth one, something I call awareness-based collective action, by which I mean bringing all the key stakeholders together and making them look at the system through all the different perspectives and understanding the deeper root issues, and then learning by doing, really addressing and moving, transforming the system through prototyping. And when you look at the underlying development model, so we used to measure economic progress through GDP, that's 2.0. Human well-being was the next one. That's a step in the right direction, HDI. And now with GNH, or the planetary pressure adjusted HDI, or the donut economic concept from Kate Raworth or others, we are really moving into a direction that is focusing on human and planetary well-being. And that's kind of the foundation. So the essence of this matrix here is something very simple. I think what we see today is that the mainstream is moving from 2.0 into 3.0. But the innovators, right, that have been innovating by moving into 3.0, they now need to move into 4.0. And if we want to address the planetary emergency that we face today globally, we really need to move to a 4.0 way of operating. And you all know probably kind of the famous Einstein quote, you cannot solve the problems that we have with the same thinking that created the problems, right? So, and similarly, I would say, paraphrasing that, you cannot solve 4.0 problems by way of operating that are rooted in 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0 ways of functioning and operating. So that's, I think, a little bit the challenge that we face in many countries today. And when you look at 4.0, you really see the boundaries, say, between health and learning and agriculture, and also new economic models collapsing, right? Because it becomes one field, and that should also make us think in education and in leadership learning that we need new formats to really capacitate the next generation of change makers to develop initiatives in this realm. So in essence, right, what I'm saying is something very simple, which is if you want to move from 3.0 or from 1 and 2.0 to 3 and 4.0, there is a profound mindset shift necessary. And one way of addressing the of visualizing the mindset shift is that you need to move from an old way of looking at systems that is depicted here. So the reality is out here, the system is out here on the one end of the telescope, and the observer is on the other side of the telescope. That's the old way of seeing the system out there. And I think the new way of seeing the system is by seeing yourself as being part of the system. You see the system out there, but you also see yourself, how you contribute to the system. When we move through this procedure from here to here on the level of the individual, we call that mindfulness. When we do that on the level of the group, we call that moving from debate to dialogue. Dialogue is not just people talking to each other. Dialogue is the capacity of a system to see itself. And that's really what I believe is the essence of leadership work today. So examples for that are, for example, here you see one of the biggest fintechs in the world, the top 30 people of Ant Financial. And they used a whole week of deep listening to all their stakeholders in their system, right? They went to 2 countries in Southeast Asia, and then listening to all the stakeholders and then sharing everything what they learned. They really learned to see their own organization, their own leadership through the eyes of all their stakeholders that they spent almost a week listening to. And this is another model, something which is a kind of systems mapping, right, with all the different stakeholders. So this is an initiative in Indonesia here. But we also have this stakeholder here is Mother Earth. So you bring in the voice of Mother Earth, you bring in the voice of the most marginalized groups, and you bring in the voice of the emerging future into a stakeholder constellation like that. And that is always kind of shifting the conversation. And it contributes to what I said at the beginning, making a system sense and see itself. And we do similar work now kind of with many of the UN organizations, helping them to accelerate the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in closing, if we want to be in service of this planetary healing and civilizational transformation or renewal, right, if that's what we try to do, then what I believe is the only way of doing it is this, by doing this, activating co-creative social fields, right? Shifting the quality of relationship among stakeholders from toxic or transactional to co-creative. And the only way of doing that is if you provide support infrastructures. So I call it school for transformation here. But what I really mean is that what we probably learned the last 70, 80 years in change management, the one thing that we learned is you cannot go through a period of transformational change without a support infrastructure. Because if you don't have the support infrastructure, the old system is sucking you back in, right? You need a support infrastructure that allows you to change kind of some of these old behaviors. And that's kind of what I mean here. So in my view, one of the primary roles that the educational system should play in all countries today is democratize access to transformation literacy. We live in a moment of disruption. We live in a decade of transformation. Transformation is going to happen one way or another. A lot of transformation is needed from us. What we don't have is transformation literacy, the capacity to lead processes of transformation in complex systems. And that's almost the blind spot in higher education today. It's the blind spot in our educational system. We have all the disciplines. We do not develop the transformation literacy that helps leaders to lead processes where the ecosystem mindset is shifting to an ecosystem mindset, where you shift from a silo view to a systems view. And I think that's really what the essence is of our societal challenge today. And it's also the most important, maybe missing piece of our educational system today, that we support the learners very little in developing these capacity. And therefore, I think that's one of the most interesting areas of change.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor, for that very insightful presentation of your work. As we are listening to you, we are also trying to sort of relate in our own leadership capacities. How have you led your own teams? And sometimes I think we would have missed, been very judgmental, have not been very open. So this could have been the leadership blind spots that all of us as leaders could have sort of experience. But your presentation today really, I think, opened our mind and heart, and definitely will change our will to the way we look at things. So, Doctor, from what I gather from your presentation is that being a Buddhist ourselves, that we need to operate from our inner space, that we need to really harness our internal intelligence and then look outwards and sense this system, and then see how we could actually go towards a system which actually takes into consideration not just your team, but everybody, and then work towards common well-being. So which is very close, as you mentioned in your presentation, also close to our philosophy of GNH. Doctor, before I share this floor to Q&A with other audience here, I would like to use the prerogative of a moderator and ask Dr. a question. As we are discussing today on leadership and transformational change, I would like to share with you that I work with the Civil Service Commission, and we have received a royal degree whereby we are asked to reform the civil service. And the Minister of Education also received a similar degree, and they are supposed to reform the education. So what I would like to share is that, as you know, we discuss GNH also as happiness as at core of whatever we do. But I wanted to check with the doctor that sometimes here we may interpret the happiness in a very narrow sense, and we might land up doing the bare minimum. So we don't want to even run into such kind of risks. So coming back to the reform, I would like to ask Doctor, how may we use your work to bring forth transformational change, and especially in really identifying and overcoming our blind spots?
Well, Tashi, that's a very big question, and I would say I needed to know to really give you a helpful response to that. I needed to know a little more about the context. But what which probably now is not the place. But what I would say is two things. One, the way you summarize the theory is precisely appropriate, right? To change systems, we need to change relationships. To change relationships, we need to change the inner place from that we operate. So it's about the cultivation of this interior condition. And of course, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, there is in countries like yours, that's much more familiar, right? So within in the West, right? So where that is maybe a new idea. For you, it's not a new idea. But there are, I think, through the traditions, we have many great practices for cultivating the interior condition of the individual. What is largely missing, I think, is cultivating the collective interior condition to do the same thing on a systems level. And that's where we basically lack methods and tools. And that's where we have developed a number. I think that's what I have been focusing on the past 2 decades. And we have developed a number of methods and tools that we offer as global commons. So we don't have copyrights on that. They are like freely shareable, and and they are used very widely. So that is certainly one dimension of with these methods and tools to apply these cultivation mechanisms in the context of leadership challenges, in the context of institutional transformation. That's certainly one thing where we have developed methods and tools that can be useful. And the other thing that we learned is it's not enough to just offer methods and tools, because what you also need is safe practice fields. Because, I mean, you know, kind of with your Buddhist context, that at the end of the day, it's all about practice, 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 right? It's not about talk, talk, talk. It's practice, practice, practice. And so you need to develop the new skills. You don't need to just listen to someone telling you something. You need practice fields. You need to apply these concepts in a safe environment and then learn from the feedback. And we found that one of the most powerful ways of shaping these practice fields is social arts. So I showed you the one picture where people did with their bodies, kind of embodying modeling the system, right? Mapping the system. So that's a social art form that we created, for example, which is a blend between mindfulness, between embodiment, right? Embodied learning, but then applying the embodied learning, not just to your own physical body, but to the social body, right? To the relationships that we have with each other, right? As humans. And so generally, I think also when you think about, there is a crisis of the humanities right now, right? Particularly in the West, because you have everything STEM, science, you know, and math and engineering and so forth. What about the humanities, right? There is a real crisis there. And what we found is that the humanities, particularly social art practices, are a very powerful tool that can be used to shape these practice fields. Because I like, because I think art is a medium that allows us to access the deeper creative capacity that we as a humanity have, but often don't activate, right? So they stay dormant. And that's maybe another learning that we have had, and where I think you, through everything you already have in your culture, have a very rich reservoir that you can draw on. So, and you know, that might be another conversation at another point where maybe we could help you to maybe use your own resources in a way that is creating these social learning and collaborative leadership learning practice fields that I think we believe and that are really missing today, both in higher ed, in education, but also in leadership development.
Thank you, Doctor. Now I'd like to open the floor for question and answer. Before I open for others, I would like to invite the President, Tashi Ura, if you would want to make a comment. Tashi Ura, as you know, Dr. Otto, is the leader behind GNH in our country. So may I request Tashi for your comments? To other audience, I would like to request that you can raise your hands by clicking on the reaction button or type your question in the chat. Thank you, Tashi. Over to you, La.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, but I don't want to waste. I thank Otto for the remarkable summary of his vast work. And I thank you for guiding us this morning. So back to the chats where I see many questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tashola. Would anyone want to, before we throw the questions in the chat to Doctor, would anyone want to ask a question in person? If not, we have a question from Doji Dradu. He's the Director General of Tourism Council of Bhutan. In his chat comment, he mentioned, thanks, I understood from you that mindset change is an important prerequisite for systems change. Can you share some practical tips to motivate voluntary mindset change, and can mindset change be incentivized? So, Doctor, over to you.
Practical tips for mindset change. Well, we know what does not work, right? Talking to people and thinking that just through rational arguments that will convince people from one mindset to another. So that's usually not working. And what is working is providing an experience. So for example, we are using a lot of learning journeys. So where you go, where you're taken out away from your own habitualized context as a leader and move into another context that you know very little of, but that somehow is relevant to the challenge that you face. So where you're a beginner, a learner, right? And that usually allows you to see very different ways of operating. And then there's a very easy connection to reflect back on your own organization from that experience and see maybe your own assumption or your own ways of being limited in a particular way. So learning journeys is one methodology. Another one is basically, often when you deal with leaders, they don't like to hear, if they are approached from people inside their own organization, they don't pay sufficiently attention. But when they are provided with the same information, say from another leader in another organization that they highly respect, from a peer, right? Somebody who is their peer in another organization, then often they're much more willing to consider other ways of operating, to consider other ways of, and I would say the third thing is to change someone else's mindset. The foundation is that you are willing to be changed yourself first, right? So it's you listening. So if you really listen to another, in other words, you cannot change another person at all, right? It's hopeless. It's not working. What you can do is to develop a relationship. And when you have that relationship, and how do you develop the relationship? By your willingness to be changed by that other person yourself. So when you, for example, by asking for help on a particular issue. So when you have built this relationship, then of course, you can also in a second step, use that relationship to maybe offer a different perspective on a topic. So that's what I would say. So it is creating experiences, creating learning journeys, asking yourself who are other people that this person that you change target, that this person would be listening to, and applying your own listening, right, in a way that is really coming from a deep place. And that is because I believe that essentially kind of the way of summarizing theory U is something you all know, the old European philosopher Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. That's not what theory U is. Theory U is I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way. In other words, the quality of my attention, the quality of my listening is shaping and co-shaping the way how a conversation is unfolding. So that's where the leverage is. So it's kind of in our listening, in our own willingness to be open for change, that we create a relationship which then allows us maybe to also help another person to consider a different perspective.
Thank you, Doctor. If we may stretch a bit of your time, we have a couple of questions. The next question is from Jigme Nobu. I understand that Theory U framework is an approach to use to manage the change from the current state to a desired future state. My request to Dr. Otto is to share your experience on how Theory U framework has been employed in bringing successful systematic transformation in public sector or any large organization. Over to you, Doctor.
Well, one example is, one current example that we are working on is the UN organization, so a multilateral organization with the UNDP and with Sdg Leadership Labs in 14 different countries. And so in the SDG, so in the UNDP, so it's like 3 different things that we do in the UN context. The first intervention, if you want, is just hosting dialogues where people experience a different conversational space. It's only 90 minutes and it brings in a speaker, but it creates like a different field of connection. It creates like a deep listening and a true dialogue experience where everyone's voices comes in, right, in small groups. And that, I mean, I have been surprised how such a simple intervention, you basically just hold a space for a different kind of conversation, how transformative that can be for how many people, because suddenly you feel a resonance, right? And the term resonance, I think, is very important for leadership because resonance is merely just objective, right? Nor is it just subjective, right? Resonance is the in-between. And it's kind of, it has to do with deepening feeling and experiencing the interiority of another being and of myself, that's kind of where resonance is happening. And that's what you can do very effectively, right? So if you bring in, so these are like 200, 300, 400 people, you can hold the dialogue of the whole organization in a way that people feel a resonance that they didn't experience before. So that's kind of the first, and I've been surprised myself with this simple to just kind of 5 events. We did 5 in summer and we just completed the last one today for the new series, how much that creates an opening, but that's just on the level of the mind. And then a second intervention, what we do is something that's called the Action Learning Lab. And that's a 4-month journey. And it's basically creating the inner foundations of really activating your own agency. And one of the core, so that's for many people is transformative. So about like a good third. And one of the key mechanisms there is small peer groups, kind of that meet and that have a structured process of going through a peer coaching circle, which is basically sharing your leadership challenge, getting feedback from colleagues, and moving into a collective moment of stillness. So it's basically applying intentional stillness, not on a meditation mantra, but your mantra is the situation that the leader is facing. So you apply this deepened awareness and this deepened attention to a leadership situation of letting go and letting come that one of the leaders is sharing. And then you receive resonance on that with embodied learning, with other gestures and feelings. And from there, you move into a conversation. So in other words, you have this holding space, this support structure for 4 months. And that creates a lot of new inspired human connections, which then are the foundation for new initiatives. So that's the second intervention. And the third one is Sdg Leadership Labs. So that's where you basically focus on existing leadership challenges where a humanitarian crisis, or it has to do with doing something for youth unemployment, or addressing certain environmental emergencies, and bringing all the different stakeholders together around that, which are both kind of UN stakeholders, but also the other stakeholders, and providing the methods and tools that these complex stakeholder gatherings are conducted in a way where you move from a silo more to a systems view, or from a ego to a more eco perspective. So it has to do with deepening your listening. It has to do with dialogue skills. It has to do with the skill to hold the space. So holding the space, I believe, is one of the core leadership capacities. And so that's what we are underway doing there. And so another public sector that we have been also working with is in Indonesia, the Indonesian government. And they applied the dialogue, the listening and dialogue processes to policy making, right? They used to have riots, right, when you set prices for food and so on. And what they basically did is they do all the stakeholder listening and dialogue and feedback and iteration before they set the prices, right? So basically employ a structured stakeholder input and dialogue process prior to the policy making rather than after it. And they found that this is helping them to address kind of some of the issues in a much more satisfactory way. And it also has been applied to inter-ministry collaborative efforts, so where you needed to address issues kind of that involve several ministries. So those are just examples. So I think it is applicable, because when you look at current public sector issues, the issue is very clear, and it's always the same. You have very hierarchical, silos leadership structure, and you face challenges that require the leaders to go beyond that, to be basically operate as ecosystem leaders. And what you don't have is the methods and tools for that. And that's, I think, where a lot can be done.
Thank you, Doctor. I think holding the space, us as leaders, seems to be a key in transformation. I hope this will also answer Kunzang Ongmu's question on what should be the starting point in creating the space for practice, something that is doable. Doctor, would you want to respond again? Because I thought your previous answer could have also answered, unless I'm wrong.
Well, I think on a personal level, I think many of you will do that already, right? So I think there is a personal practice, right? Develop a personal practice where that allows you to connect with your own deeper sources of awareness and attention. So that's meditation for some people. That's something else for others, maybe. I would say a second leverage point is a circle, right? So that because no one can do this stuff alone, you don't need that many people really, but you need a circle of colleagues or friends that you can explore these ideas and also issues that you may be facing together, right? Where there's this holding space. People who can understand, who can really listen to you from a deep place with the mind and heart open, and really with an intention to help each other. I think that's the second one. And the third one, I would say, is do what you love and love what you do. So to really find, and the only way to do one's best work really is to do what you love. And the only way to find out what that is to follow your heart, right? So I think that has to do with what we discussed earlier, to often that means you need to step into the territory of the unknown. You need to step into new territories, and that requires courage, and it also requires a support structure. But I think often people today in the world, many people feel there is an old world and civilization that's dying, that's actually hitting the wall, right? We are, as a civilization, we are on the wrong path. Many people feel that, most people. And many people, when you talk to them, they would say, personally, if you ask me, I would like to be part of a different story. And then they would add very quickly, but I don't know how. And I think that's the situation. And the how can only be found together, but will require this capacity of sensing potential and stepping into that. So that's the third one, I would say. Do what you love and love what you do and follow your heart.
Thank you, Doctor. We have another question from Yangchin Soket. Thank you for your insightful presentation. With reference to making the system see and sense itself, feel the pain of the other, how do we overcome a situation where leaders have privileged access to services and are ignorant of the normal, painful processes felt by others?
Sorry, can you say the last sentence again? So, where leaders?
The question is, how do we overcome a situation where leaders have privileged access to services and are ignorant of the normal, painful processes felt by the others?
By the others. Yes, that of course is not a specialty of Bhutan. That's like all over the place, right? So that's the problem we face just about wherever you go, and to different degrees, yes. And I think one way to think about that is being inside the bubble, right? And that as a leader, I think you need to get out of your bubble, right? Because I mean, that's basically what the Buddha did, right? So you need to get onto the streets, right? You need to see what's going on, and you need to leave the habitualized environment from your own institution every now and then, right? Not always. You need to return also, of course, but that's kind of part of leadership work, I would say. And those of us who are working in the field of learning or coaching or organizational development, our job is to help leaders to get out of their own bubble, right? To help leaders to have these experiences, because leaders that have these privileges often are not aware of them, right? And I think the key really is that particularly the bigger the institution, the more, I mean, that's a general rule. There is a little variation and exceptions, but generally the bigger and the more successful the institution, the more you're stuck inside your own bubble, right? It's very hard, right, to get out of that. And it takes listening with your mind and heart wide open, but it also takes a method to move out, right? And you can call it a learning journey, a sensing journey. You need to create context for yourself where you can see your own system through the eyes of others, kind of particularly through the eyes of those that are least privileged in the organization. We have I think we are just at the beginning, and it's going around the world, a massive awakening around that. Because I think Bhutan may be like a little different case there, but generally the issue of colonialism, right? And in the US, we have kind of slavery on top of that. And all the structural violence, the direct violence, the structural violence, the cultural violence that has been resulting in collective trauma, right? All of that is coming up now. So as leaders of privileged institutions, it is our job to address our own blind spot. And the only way of doing it is doing it together with others, right? And to move out of your own bubble. It is a process that is starting. I mean, here in America, it happens in every single organization. It's also happening in other places like Europe, or it's beginning to happen there. And I think we just see the beginning of that. And it's a very important role. And those of us who are in the learning space, we really need to help these leaders to move from one world to the other world and then back into the first one, right? So to really have this ecosystem breathing approach, right? Kind of that you breathe in and breathe out, that you are inside your own organizational shell, but then also outside. I think that's what we need to learn how to do, because we don't have practices around that, and we are just at the very beginning. But it will be key to deal with the challenges that are ahead of us.
Thank you, Doctor. Is it okay to go with 2 more questions?
Yeah, let's do 2 more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we have one from Simriti, which says, all changes happen top-down. Is that still true or relevant in operating system 4, version 4?
Sorry, can you ask the question again?
His question is, all changes happen top-down, and is this still true in operating system version 4?
So I think it really varies, right? So some changes happen top down, some changes happen bottom up, some changes happen middle out, and some changes happen all around, right? Kind of coming from the periphery inside, right? Outside in. So I would say, and yes, there are differences in countries, in cultures. There is the relevance and the importance of top-down and bottom-up. But I would say it is very, very different in different contexts. And even in each country, you have very different cases, right, in the sectors. As you move towards what we see in society is moving to more complex structures. And that means that the old vertical structures are less and less functional alone. It doesn't mean that they totally go away, but it means that they need to be complemented through a more decentralized way of governance, decision-making. They need to be complemented through networked ways of organizing, where we cultivate the relationships across boundaries and mobilize action that way. And the 4.0 is really then the collective transformative action, and that we know is necessary in many cases, and we see beginnings of that, right? I would say the fact that we have SDGs is a small beginning in that. The fact that we have the Paris Agreement is a step into that direction. And we see in the West, I would say, a lot of steps into this direction, not on a national level, not at all, but on a local level, right? That's where you see it, where we begin to organize around the commons. And so that's promising. I would say in 4.0, you still need leadership, but you no longer have just one center, right? So that's not the case. And often the role of leadership, so when I visualize 4.0, sometimes I like to flip the pyramid, right? So you can write the pyramid up, down. And if you flip it, it's more like a root system, right? So leadership is creating the root conditions, creating the soil conditions, right, for something to grow. That's more like a tree structure, if you want. So I would say hierarchy is still there, but the function is different, so that you're more kind of enabling. You're more, as we said before, Tashi, holding the space, right? Cultivating the space for others to deepen their relationship. So that's what I would say, because if you many of you will know that if you bring just all the stakeholders that need to work together into the same room, often nothing very useful happens, right? Because then the same people give the same speeches, and operating from the same silo perspective. So what you really want is a different quality of relationship. It's a different quality of listening and conversing with each other. It's a different holding space. And that requires leadership, but it's not a leadership, the old top down, but it's a leadership that is holding the space and that is enabling others to step into their own agency.
Thank you, Doctor. So there's one more question. There's one more question from FP Bhutan. I understand that systems change takes more time, more money, more effort, and more focus. On the other hand, systems change also means less certainty, possibility of a failure. What is your advice? Doctor, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So I would say today what we see is that often the biggest leadership challenges that we face in an organization are rarely of a kind that the organization can solve alone, right? As a leader today, the biggest leadership challenges that we face are of a nature that require us to make it clear that you can't do it alone. You need to bring together a group of stakeholders that need to relate different to each other. So that's just a pragmatic imperative, right? So you can, yes, it takes more effort. Yes, it takes more resources. But what is the alternative, right? It's not doing it. Yes, you save money in the shorthand, and then you have a bigger problem tomorrow. So I think leadership is really about identifying those areas where attention is needed, right? Leadership, in my view, is a lot about paying attention, right? As a leader, what you really do is you shape the fields of collective attention. And today we deal a lot with what I call emerging complexity. So emerging complexity is you deal with challenges where A, the solution is unknown. B, the problem keeps changing. Like COVID, right? Yesterday it was this, now we have the new variant from Vietnam and so forth, right? So it keeps changing. And C, you don't know exactly who you need to convene in order to solve the issue. That's emerging complexity. And that's most of the biggest leadership problems we face today are of that nature. So yeah, of course, that's it takes effort, right? It's hard, and it will take a lot of resources. But we know that from the environment, right? If we don't make the investments now, 5, 10, 20 years later, it's multiplied, right? It's so much more expensive, right? So that's what leadership is, that you identify these issues and that you identify where, even though no one is forcing us, we want to put on the focus right now. We want to put on the attention right now, and we want to create coherent fields of attention that allow us to transform certain ways of operating. So yeah, I would agree. Those are the issues, but that's kind of why you have leadership, right? If it would be automatic, right, you don't need leaders, right? So we don't need to talk here. So the very fact that this is hard, that it needs a refined assessment, kind of where you want to put your focus on, say in an institutional transformation, and then providing the holding spaces. And yes, they require time, and all human transformation requires a lot more time than we initially think, right? Kind of the technical transformation is easy. You can buy digital infrastructure, that's easy. What's not easy is the human dimension, right? The behavioral dimension, and the holding spaces that allow us to connect with and activate the deeper sources of who we are as human beings, right? And of our individual, but also collective agency. And that requires attention. It requires sustained attention and leadership in holding these spaces. And it requires money. Yeah. So I can only agree of what is in the question and say, that's the point. That's why it's called leadership.
Thank you, Dr. We did mention that it's going to be last two questions, but there is one which says, is theory easier to apply in Western or Eastern civilization?
That's an interesting question. And what I like about when I'm in Asia is, so I have had, in many countries, right, people look at this thing, and so at the visual, right, open mind, open heart, and they say, what? You're what? An American? This is our stuff, right? This is kind of, this is our stuff, open mind, open heart, open will. So you could say, in many ways, it is maybe more at home, right? In the Eastern civilization, and let's say all civilizations that have the components of Buddhism, but also Taoism, and you can also find it in Confucianism. But I would say, being like a Westerner, I would also say, even in the Western tradition, you can find, there is, so that's like a hidden lineage, right? So there's, for example, there's Western science, but then there's certain people who had a very different idea of science, right? The whole kind of tradition of phenomenology, or when you look, for example, Goethe's work on science. So there is a way of science that is not based on hate and killing nature, right, and dissecting it, but based on love, right? That knowing means actually love, and that we can develop refined methodologies. And I think there is a whole other tradition, and is really at home in the East very clearly, certainly more clearly than in the West. But I will also claim that in the West, there is this hidden tradition that just did not manage to be dominant, right? But there are these reference points. And what I think we need to do now is to really develop the social sciences in a way that brings really also the deeper dimensions of our own humanity to the core. So basically, we have step one in science, right? So that's like natural sciences. And I think the next step would be applying the scientific process to the social realm, kind of to our own interiority, kind of to the more subtle aspects of our experience, to not just what we can measure outside, but also to our refined experiences. And that's, of course, where, for example, Buddhist traditions of meditation and of inner cultivation have been leading the way. But I think in our age, in the 21st century, we need to blend that with science. We need to blend that with scientific methods. And that's where, I see what I'm trying to do in small ways is really at the interface of science, consciousness or kind of interior development and profound social change. And I think it's kind of in that triangle that is at home in many places and also in no place, because it has been like it has had, the beginnings have had a marginal existence in major institutions, at least kind of the established institutions of science, certainly in the West. And yet, because the challenges that we face will require kind of new ways of addressing them, I think we live in a moment where many of these things can change, and where a new generation is also being born on Earth and growing up, that actually bring a very natural inclination and capacity also to operate on this 4.0 level, right? And if you throw these people into old style 1.0, 2.0 structures, many of them are very quickly disenchanted, right? So that's something that comes to my mind. So I would partly agree, but I would also say there are roots, even in the West itself, that often have been overlooked and ignored.
Thank you, Doctor, for really putting these things very beautifully in common language for common people like us to understand, which otherwise such beautiful things remained in a very abstract form, and it was very difficult for people, especially common people of common mind and common, very little intelligence, to digest such beautiful things that shapes, human beings and humanity. So with this, I apologize to others whose questions we cannot consider, because I think we are going to deprive Dr. Otto of his sleep and rest. So I would like to now bring this beautiful conversations to an end with a small vote of thanks on behalf of CBS and on behalf of all the audience from Bhutan, as well as I have some friends who have joined from Japan and Singapore. Doctor, thank you for your most active, to the audience, I would like to say that thank you for your most active participation and giving that deep listening. Remember, transformation from ego to eco starts with deep listening. So you just practice that. We hope that our viewers are energized to cultivate and harness our inner intelligence and find purpose and meaning as you move on. To all the leaders present here, we hope you found useful tips to start your own transformational journey and to lead the rest. In your work, you mentioned that the real superpower of the 21st century in our capacity is to realign attention and intention on the level of a whole of a system through the awareness-based collective action, Doctor. So we hope that cultivating inner intelligence and building collective consciousness of ecology, society, and spiritual will take shape, and that's how we will move on and should become the way of the world. One of the many approaches Doctor has mentioned, I personally hope that we would be able to evolve our current education system that would create conditions that will enable such transformation of mankind to the benefit of humans, as well as for the planet, as well as of all the sentient beings that coexist with humans. So may I now, on behalf of all the audience and organizers here at CBS, thank Dr. Otto Scharmer, our renowned guest speaker, for sharing his great work of advancing well-being of humanity and the planet. We are particularly grateful to Dr. for sparing your extra time, although the commitment was only for an hour. I think we stretched already about 30 to 40 minutes. So with this, on behalf of the audience also, I would like to thank Doctor. Before we close the screen, I would also like to share that, Doctor, some of the screens have institutes behind, therefore, when the question from FB was asked, actually it was Dr. Kilepenjo from that screen. So we thought that we should also mention this to Doctor. Before we close the screen, I would like to, for the information of our audience here, that next week we have William Kukin, the Director of Mindfulness Center in Oxford University, who will share insights. The title is not here, but we are going to have Dr. William on Friday, 11th of June at 2 p.m. Please tune in again at CBS Flourishing of Mind Zoom virtual space. Once again, thank you, Dr. Otto, for your truly invigorating and substantial exchange today, especially in this time, even for us, when His Majesty has commended diligence, giving many examples of such selfless acts of service across our country. We hope that today's exchange has invigorated our commitment to bring our profound values and innermost skills to bear our challenges and actions professionally and publicly, as well as within friends and family. With this, I hope today's session, if not, even if we don't change at all, but we start from today to make some small inner changes, and that should actually reflect on your face. And I would like to request all of us to actually switch on your camera and say thank you to Dr. Otto. And would like to get that beautiful smile. Inner change actually starts with a beautiful smile, I should say.
Thank you, Dr. Otto.